So how did the Gupta Leaks actually come about, and how did the Daily Maverick get so sort of intertwined in the leak and bringing it to the sort of forefront?
In touch with an activist who he thought he'd be able to trust with the information, the source documents, and advice with who to hand it over to. Obviously, a media outlet would have been one of the best places to do that. Our editor was kind of offered the information, which we recognized at the time was going to be game changing. So we jumped at the opportunity to get stuck into it with the project, but came with a hell of a lot of just new challenges and planning that you don't normally need to take into account in your day-to-day sort of running of a news operation. The secrecy, the safety of the source, the having to have meetings, taking digital security and physical security up an extra level, having meetings in parks, leaving phones, in
so did it actually go that far? So you're living that sort of snowed in lifestyle.
It was for those 2 months where we had the information and we were the only guys who had the information, the target on our backs was obviously quite big. We had to take every precaution, because if the people knew that we had this information, we were the only ones who had the information, the incentive for them to stop us getting it out would have been great. Now that multiple publications have the information, that's obviously reduced significantly. But at the time, it was really next level cloak and dagger stuff that we had to undertake to ensure our own safety and that of the source.
Okay, and then you've reported on the size of the amount of data that you have. How big is the sort of amount of files and data that you need to actually process and sort of go through?
Well, when we started working on it was 200,000 emails that we managed to get sort of cleaned up and available to use. That has since grown to about 500,000 emails, and in total a terabyte of data, of files, contents of a hard drive. It's a lot. I mean, if you think of how many Word documents and PDFs can go into a terabyte of data, and how many emails, it's a lot, and it's there's just so much to search. It's not like you're going, oh, we'll just follow this one corrupt person all the way through these documents. It's multiple corrupt relationships and multiple corrupt entities. So, the permutations of what you can follow around, plus all the various different elements of metadata on each of those documents.
And then also like cross-referencing with public databases and finding those sort of correlations that exist that might not be so obvious in the very beginning. So
it's a huge. It would take a team of 20 investigators at least a year to kind of go through all this stuff in the level that you'd want to. But you don't really have that luxury of time, so you kind of need to plan. What are the hardest hitting stories you can start with? What are the stories that the Bungani team have been chasing for years, but couldn't fill in the pieces?
So was that the first objective? Let's corroborate what we've already thought, or sort of been given insinuations has occurred.
Our editor, when he got it, it wasn't even we didn't even think twice about reaching out to the Bungani guys to say, we need you to work on this with us. We don't have the skills and the history to be able to do this alone. And we would do an injustice to the investigation if it didn't involve them. So we were kind of, especially in the beginning, led by what their feeling was around the main stories. Each of their journos had been investigating different elements of this corrupt empire, so they were running off on that, and then we were just kind of like fitting in and going on. Our new investigators we'd hired for the Scorpio unit had also been working on some stuff in the past. The emails were showing up some new elements that we could then cover on that basis, sort of lower hanging fruit. And yeah, as we go and continue to go deeper into the muck, new things keep popping up all the time. So, but it's really a case of trying to piece together and paint this web as clear as possible. We know things like, it is impossible for an audit company to audit the Gupta's empire for, 12 years and not know what the hell was going on. So things like KPMG were going to come up. The wedding was a huge thing in the news in the first place. So you can kind of backtrack to that and sort of add more information to that. So from an editorial perspective, the editors are involved on, consultation all the time, talking about what the best use of resources, what are the biggest, hardest hitting ones we can go for first. And then it's just really a case of, maintaining the will to live through all of this while you still keep going. It's a terabyte of information. It's a lot of crap.
So how many news organizations at the moment actually have access to it?
At the moment, I think it's 5 news organizations. I think the process of making all this information available to other media houses has been completed, and other media houses have been offered the opportunity to access that information, signing the legal agreements to be able to access it, and the risks that come with, publishing this stuff.
Okay, and then from a legal point of view, is there any sort of legal ramifications involved, or is it all?
So at a very basic level, journalism that is published in the interests of the greater public good usually is the principle that allows us to do what we do. But in this case as well, we're 100% sure that the information wasn't obtained illegally, that there aren't any legal issues around that.
But I'm also assuming actually dragging this into a courtroom isn't exactly the brightest move, because it would lead to the data being...
Yeah, and more information being made available to prosecutors, for example.
Yeah, and the validity of the data also being either 100%, well, it already is, but you're now having a court say, no, this is definitely legitimate data.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't, obviously when we got it in the beginning, we got a sample of the data. And the sample looked good, and when you look at the volume of data there, to be able to replicate...
It's just not practical for someone to try and spoof that amount of data. No. And it's already been corroborated by some MPs even.
Yes, yeah.
So, I mean, it's that...
No one has really come out and questioned the validity of the data. I think the line has been, I haven't seen this, so I can't comment on it. It's
the usual.
Yeah.
It's led to some interesting things about corporate involvement, and now also what's nice is you've got like the Signia CEO sort of holding KPMG sort of accountable to answer. Like she's using her position as using KPMG as an auditor and saying, you now need to actually answer these questions, otherwise I'm not going to use you anymore. So it's like, what do you think the role of corporate responsibility sort of is when it comes to these sorts of things?
Well, I think it's important for the public to realize that government corruption doesn't happen in a vacuum. Most times, if not, it requires the private sector on the other side of the equation for that. The bribes that are being paid to siphon money off from the state involve, private enterprises. Those private enterprises are audited, they're banked, they are subject to their own, industry regulations. So
it's also interesting when you've got the international entities, and now you've got different jurisdictions potentially getting involved in looking into the behavior of these international corporations.
Yeah, we can't rely on our local authorities to do that. So it's good that big multinationals are being pulled into this. It's good to see them taking some sort of action, which is great, because it also then shows how guilty the parties on the other side of the transaction look, even though they're not taking action on this side.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, it just proves how how fraudulent and out of order those transactions were. I mean, when you're talking about billions of dollars, I mean, in the case of Transnet and SAP systems, Transnet was identified as one of the 15 biggest accounts for SAP worldwide. I mean,
it's crazy.
That's mad. That's mad money when you're thinking of the size of SAP. So it's good that the public realizes that, because it's also it's easy to kind of stand from afar and point government corruption, government this, government that. It's corporates that people friends, some cases family, work for. Where the culture is all about greed, profit.
And I don't think they actually realize obviously some do, but I think some of them see it almost as just doing business.
And that's a problem. So how can you sit here and complain about a corrupt government when the ethics in the business place aren't there to start with themselves?
And that's why so many people were so impressed with the CEO of Signia for holding other corporates accountable and saying, I'm not going to give you my business if that's the way you.
And I think that's a step in the right direction. We can't just we need business to. Business has been a big enabler of this crap that's gone down, either from participating or being silent with what's gone on. This stench around KPMG has been there for a long time. No one should have been working with them when the first stuff started coming out. I mean, and they've been involved not only in the Gupta scandals, but the SARS rogue unit scandal as well, the Net1 scandal. They pop up all over. It didn't take a lot for people to go, well, we shouldn't be using them. And in that way, forcing their hand to take action against what could have been corrupt elements in their own organization, or if the culture is just too big, not using them at all. But that's the kind of influence that business can yield, but hasn't yielded. And that's they've enabled this to take place through their silence, and as I said, in some cases their participation. But then also in other cases, just being too afraid to speak out.
That's a big one.
Being too afraid to speak out, being too afraid to support
organizations that do speak out. Yeah, but if it becomes so detrimental to be involved in any grey areas whatsoever, because you risk losing 100 other clients, then that sort of will almost police itself to a degree. Because if it becomes so detrimental to be implicated in anything, because you'll potentially lose other clients, I think at the end of the day, that would be the best sort of outcome. We could have more people coming forward like Signia and saying, if you operate like this, you're not getting our business at the end of the day.
Yeah, look, I mean, and in that space, they're a price, they're a price maker. They don't, they can, they have a choice of other audit firms that they can go to. It's not like they're going to get a much better audit from KPMG or much better audit from Deloitte. You're going to get an audit, right? I mean, it's not exactly like high end, I guess. There are differences, and there can be such a thing as a quality audit that's done in value-adding audits. Of course, it can be, but it's it's very easy for them to give that business to someone else. It's not really going to hurt their business. Yeah. Question comes, if that decision was going to hurt their bottom line, would they have been as vocal? So, for example, if they were if they had SAP systems installed in their business all the way through, and now they had to change that.
Yeah, which apparently is an absolute nightmare.
Would they still do that? So it's easy to change auditors like this. That's no problem. It doesn't cost you anything. But if they say, well, we're not going to use SAP systems, we're going to rip this all out, and it's going to cost us 50 million rand to do that.
Yeah, then things change a little bit.
That's what I'd like to see. So it's a little bit of easy sort of, it's a lower hanging fruit on that side to be able to say we won't do it because it doesn't cost anything. It's when the real cost comes in. It's no, I will not pay this bribe to get this profitable contract. Those are the kinds of decisions that we need to see business making. Or yes, I will support this organization through whatever means I can under the radar, whatever it is, because they're doing such a good job. I don't need to have my name alongside this. There's those kinds of things. Those are the real impacts that you make. Changing auditors, not such a biggie.
Yeah, and then I'm keen to also just quickly how did you approach security of the data? Are there any specifics there that you can share?
Yeah, so encryption was obviously in the early days when we started working on this, when it came out, when it was known that we had the data, or even before it was known that we had the data. The plan was to, and still is, I think the guys are all working on air-gapped computers. So the emails were loaded. So just loading, 400,000 emails into a client that you can read and search the stuff is a nightmare. Just like trying to work it out, because some people's hard drives weren't big enough. Because the initial amount of emails grew to double the size, so we were like, we just bought all these new clean Macs to work on, So they were air gapped. There were the drives were encrypted. We moved to a different location, so the B guys came to work at our office. Because
can you actually quickly, just for anyone who doesn't know what an air gap is, give a description?
Yeah, so it's a computer, in most cases, a new one that has never been connected to the internet, that has a fresh installation of apps and software, so that in case someone, if you were under surveillance in the past and someone had managed to get some rogue software onto your laptop, that it's not being compromised by loading all that data on that and then not connecting that new laptop to the internet.
Yeah, because the air gap's usually like a description of a lack of connectivity.
Yeah, and it's really just air around the computer. And
some guys go to extremes when it comes to creating air gaps between their physical computer and the outside world.
So the guys, all the investigators have been working on their own, carrying around a second laptop with intense passwords and stuff. Where possible, we use as many Macs as possible with supposedly better encryption. We had a drill for if the Hawks raided the office, what we would do. We had to get extra security outside the door. We had lawyers on standby for any sort of urgent injunctions if we needed to get anything. So there was a threat of, and then also at the time was making sure that we were protecting the identity of the source. And that if anyone managed to get hold of the data, they would be able to figure out who it was. So there were a whole lot of reasons why it needed to be air gapped. Although a lot of that is diminished now, I think. But
how did you approach? Did you have a general? Did you call? Like, I'm actually curious. If I, for instance, found myself in that situation, how did you? Who did you speak to, or who did you bring in, or did you have to?
What, from a physical security, or
no, just from a general knowledge sort of point of view, like knowing about air gapping, and was this just something? You sort of had to learn on the go, or did you?
I mean, we did rely a lot on the Bungani guys' experience, and we talked about it, and the guys have been on investigative journalism conferences and digital security for journalists.
Okay,
there's a lot of that stuff out there. It's a big concern. There are a couple of organizations that, even in parallel to this, we're funding sort of pilot projects in giving separate, sort of Chromebooks with a clean, with a special installation of Chrome OS that basically shuts down and wipes the.
I think it's called the Black Book, if I recall correctly. Yeah, every time you start it up, it starts fully fresh installation.
Fully fresh installation.
And Snowden and a few of them.
So we've got a pilot. Chromebook that we've been working on, which is in parallel. So it's kind of the digital security is a huge thing, especially in this world of investigative journalism.
Because I don't think you'd ever. It's quite rare to find yourself in that sort of situation, I guess. So.
Yeah, it is, but I think people will be as more and more these things happen, people will start taking, greater measures. Just looking at the emails that have come out now, you kind of think twice about
what you're going to put in
putting
writing,
something in writing.
I think there's a lot of CEOs and a lot of people out there probably all calling in teams saying, can this happen to us? Like, what can we put in place
the electronic shredder is probably being whipped out in a couple of places now,
And then just to finish off, looking at the future, how much time do you think, or how much more do you think is going to actually come from the leaks? Is there still smoking guns that could be found? How long is the roadmap ahead?
I'm feeling that we've done about 35 investigative pieces since we've started in 2 months. I think you just don't know. It's kind of like you're staring at this, what are those? Remember those posters you used to look at?
It's just all the dots.
The dots, and then the stuff would just fly out at you after a while, So I have a feeling it's going to be a little bit like that from here on in. That you'll be looking, and then one day you'll find traces.
Something that just links something up.
It's like mining for Bitcoin now. It gets you get the stuff at the beginning, it gets harder and more expensive, and there's less.
That's a very good analogy, actually.
Yeah, less ROI. But this is what the entire Amabungani team, the Scorpio team, has been funded and founded to do this job. So as long as it's still relevant and we're still finding stuff to publish, the guys will work on that, and then it'll dissipate and I guess other stuff will come up. We've got some big occurrences happening in South Africa, and it's not like the world's going to stop being corrupt after this.
It's going to keep happening.
Yeah, it's going to keep happening. Hopefully not to the same level as the Guptas took it to in South Africa, which is actually quite extraordinary. If you think about it, if you look at the amounts involved and the network, and something like, at last time I checked, it was 150 companies that were being used in this.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So that level, that scale is actually it's impressive. It's like, this is. You got to take your hats off to them in terms of the masterminding that was required to put all this together.
Not a simple task.
They did wash, rinse, and repeat the formula, which is access to government spend, create a company to service that spend, or use their influence to get a commission for someone else's business with the state. And they just kept doing that over and over again, and just keep building up a bigger and bigger pile of cash with impunity. Knowing that no one in South Africa at least is going to prosecute them, and So the question I think is, to answer that question of how much from here, I guess also depends on whether anything actually happens to them.
That's also very true. Yeah.
If they're still here, still doing this stuff, then the incentive to keep going and keep unearthing this is still going to be great. So,
do you think there's room? So you've proved that there is this opportunity for data to be leaked and to sort of corroborate stories, implicate people. Do you think there's room? Okay, we've got WikiLeaks, which now puts the procedure in place for whistleblowers to leak information. I'm not sure how many South Africans would ever go to, say, a WikiLeaks. There have been incidents of that happening. Is there a way of putting a procedure in place so that whistleblowers do have a sort of easy sense that coming to you guys or coming to Amabungani or Scorpio is the best approach? Their safety is put first.
So, we are putting measures in place with our new website to be able for people to drop stuff, send through, PGP encrypted messages.
Okay, that's amazing.
So we're catering for that. The challenge is that, if the stuff ever does get to court, for example, then there's a problem, because as a nation, we don't really take care of whistleblowers. There's no defense fund, or there's no we had to we had to, raise a relocation allowance, for the source. Dude had to leave the country, him and his family. And you don't just uproot and leave that easily, quickly, and cheaply.
No, definitely not.
So we need to, get some kind of fund established, and only big business and wealthy South Africans can afford to fund that. But some kind of program that looks after whistleblowers and makes it easy for them to, mount a defense, a legal defense that isn't going to bankrupt them, and also put their lives in danger, and also ruin their chances of working in a lot of sectors. So
you're essentially giving up the life you've been living, especially when it's at this degree and this size. But I think one day, if it ever becomes public, whoever it was will be held in the highest esteem, because it's done in the interest of the public and it's done for the right reasons. You are sacrificing the life you've got for the better interest of
and I think that will happen. I mean, with a bit of time between now and then, I think he will want his name to come out, and I think he will be celebrated. I think it was brave. I mean, put yourself.
I've actually got goosebumps even talking about it. It's hugely brave.
He put his life on the line, put his family's life on the line. He had to relocate, and then there was that month where the Sunday Times had started publishing, and he was only due to leave a month later, because our plans were that we were going to take 2 months to investigate all of this. But in that time that got leaked to the Sunday Times, they published it, the stuff was out there, and he was still in the country, with a high likelihood that they knew who had leaked the information. So there was a period of 3 to 4 weeks where
it's a scary time.
We were like, maybe this dude is, if we don't, if his SMSs don't get responded to, that something could have happened. It could have happened to him. We were like, fuck, this could happen. And then, and there's a whole crazy story, what was happening in the background that people don't know about, that we can't, talk about yet. But there was, that for us was the biggest thing. Well, obviously being scooped was big and disappointing, but there was also this sense of fuck, this dude's walking around with the target on his back.
Put his safety above all else.
And that was the thing that we were really upset about.
But I think that's also why you will probably be the go-to for future leaks. I think it was quite clear you put the interest of the source above pretty much everything else.
Yeah, I mean, we had to make sure. I mean, someone goes to that length of putting themselves out there, and you don't respect that, then then I won't say we were just as bad as the other side, but I mean, it does. It would. Our ethics would be questionable if we did that. We'd be putting our own greed ahead of the big picture here, or our duty to the profession and to people who participate in it.
Okay, well, I mean, I think, is there anything else we might not have touched on? I think we've gone quite in depth there.
Yeah,
it's definitely a very fascinating point in, I don't know, it's almost the history of the media in South Africa. I think there will likely be books, documentaries, movies.
There's 2 documentaries that I think are being pitched now. Our own team here is working on one. We've had external sources, so I know the guys who did Mine is Shut Down are also pitching to do a documentary around this, which is great because I mean from a personal brand perspective, not my personal brand, from Daily Maverick brand perspective, that's great. But also, I mean, the profession of good journalism, investigative journalism, if it gets out there, and also what goes on behind the scenes.
It's a very good point. I think it now shows sort of the excitement and the sort of, I don't know, the importance and the level.
Society.
Yeah, exactly. The change you can actually make to the country by reporting on these sorts of things.
Yeah, and what a society looks like with a weakened or non-existent fourth estate. And this now we start going into the questions around greater media issues. What does that look like? What does a world without good journalism look like? What is a world with BuzzFeed and and aggregated news site and fake news and where real journalism is on its last legs? What does that world look like? And I think we've gone some way to show that if we continue down the same path that we're currently on, the trajectory that we're currently on, where business will put all their spend into Facebook and Google. Well, Facebook and Google aren't going to do the shit that we've just done. They're not going to be doing all this work where there's no monetary return for what you're doing. What kind of how are we going to be able to still fulfill that role? If it's not being funded properly, that stuff doesn't come cheap. This investigations take ages, take skilled people, and you generally end up getting sued. Or worrying for your safety, and all that stuff comes with a cost. So it takes us down that road, and luckily it highlights us at a critical time to say, should we've actually got to do something different here? We can't just and it keeps going back to business. The mentality, the approach, the worldview that business and corporate South Africa especially has is that we just can't continue doing what we're doing here and expect all this stuff just to happen by itself. We can't expect people to say, "Oh, sorry, we can't support you because you're too political."
Yeah,
in case you haven't noticed, we live in a very political country.
Exactly.
Support has to come one way or another, whether it's direct or indirect. It has to come, because in the absence of that, this stuff is going to. We can see the on the ground effects of this corruption. We can see, and here in Cape Town, you can see the booms on the state of the rail system in Cape Town is a complete fuck show, because it's run by the National PRASA organization, and booms at level crossings are broken.
Yeah.
And people are driving through and trains are coming. 3 cars have been hit in Muizenberg. You're seeing service delivery because sewage treatment plants. Less than 10% of the sewage treatment plants in South Africa currently work. But the trains are fucked. The rolling blackouts we used to have with Eskom. All these things are a function of the real consequences of this corruption that take place. And as a society, as a corporate sector, we've got to change the way that we engage. And yes, investigative journalism for the state stuff is one element of it, but there's civil society that needs support. There's frontline organizations. You do a lot of great work, trying to either expose the corruption or trying to force government into action. And those guys just don't get any support.
Yeah, and media accountability has been pivotal in holding back. It would be, without it, it would be pretty much the floodgates would be open.
And we're now getting to sort of crazy shit is happening. Example that has just popped up recently. There's a digital news publication in Zimbabwe, and I know the guy. Been running for about 5 years, and he does it sort of millennial reporting kind of stuff. So not really the Daily Maverick kind of stuff, but enough to be a good sort of a decent outlet, right? But generating revenue is so difficult that he's resorted to running a fake news site in South Africa. Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That has almost as much traffic as Daily Maverick. Okay. That generates revenue for him to run his real news site in Zimbabwe.
Wow.
Okay. So now this is how fucked up the media is, that guys who are trying to run a legitimate organization are running baboon has sex with gay man kind of stories to generate money from AdSense to fund his real news organization.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of do we, like, this is where we are. We need to take a long, hard look at this. And that's why, we do things like having media gathering and, as an education, and why, as an education element, saying, guys, we need to take a long, hard look. We need to fix it. We can't do this by ourselves. We can't fight on the budgets that we have. You can't expect us to be the front line without any other support. Where, an AN7 and a New Age gets, more than 250 million rand.
Yeah, that's the thing.
In government advertising.
It shows just it's just like you said, it shows just how fucked the system is.
And you go to other big media outlets who are all scrambling for survival, but where, like,
if you
just
play
a
the
Bieber
game,
article will generate more revenue than, like,
it's like if you play the game according to sort of the rule book of sorts, then everything's fine and dandy. But the second you sort of go against the grain and do a more ethical, sort of honest approach to things, then it suddenly becomes almost impossible to stay alive.
Well, that's what we've been feeling like. The playing fields have not been, for us at least, haven't been level for a long time, and we've been sort of playing against every challenge and hurdle you can think of. Whether it's the global deterioration of the business news model, whether it's Google and Facebook. I mean, our competitors are Google and Facebook. Yeah. How would you like that for a business, right? And then on top of that, you have the big media in South Africa that wants us to die. Then you have businesses that won't support you because you're too political. And you kind of go, well, hang on a sec. If we go where the money is, then we'd be writing Justin Bieber articles and and fake news articles, and but you don't want to do that, because if we don't do it, then who the hell is going to do it?
Yeah, it's a tough situation to be in. But I mean, you guys seem to be turning things, well, not turning things around. That's a bad choice of words. But I mean, things seem to be sort of gaining momentum, and you definitely seem to be going in the right direction.
The brand is growing, the traffic is growing, revenue is growing, not fast enough, but and you just got to believe that people will come around to the idea that a news or media organization that is built on the original fundamental principles of good ethical journalism can survive and prosper. But that's a big mountain to climb. But anyway, we've got our hiking boots on.